Please be seated. "200 years ago in London, there lived a very eccentric man. Some called him crazy because he saw things that other people didn't see. When he was only 4 years old, for example, he saw God out his window. And when he was 9, a tree full of angels. Those visions never went away, and even on his deathbed, according to a friend who was there, his eyes brightened and he burst out singing of the things he saw in heaven. He was deeply moved by the suffering of poor people, especially children. He himself was poor most of his life, and when he died, his wife had to borrow money to bury him. You may have guessed that I am talking about poet William Blake, known to every school child who ever learned "Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright." What I want to share with you, though, is a line from a different poem, and it goes like this. "We are put on earth a little space that we may learn to endure the beams of love." To endure the beams of love. Is that really why we are here? Is love something to be endured? How in the world could that be good news? Holy Thursday, or Maundy Thursday as we call it, is the day that marks the beginning of the final drama leading to the cross. It's the beginning, you might say, of the end. The traveling, the teaching, the healings are over. There will be no more parables, no more signs and wonders. One last meal together, and then life as Jesus and his disciples have known it is over. It's hard to follow the story when we read it as we do in broken segments week after week. But here's a brief recap. You will remember that Jesus has just before inflamed the religious authorities by raising Lazarus from the dead. It was positively the last straw, the final provocation, providing his enemies with the perfect excuse to get rid of him. Then a cat and mouse game ensues. Those who wish Jesus dead step up their vigilance. Jesus lays low and waits. It's Passover, and naturally Jesus, being an observant Jew, heads to Jerusalem. On his way there, he stops one more time at the home of his friends Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. In the course of the meal prepared for him, Mary, in an almost uncanny foreshadowing of the events we remember tonight, anoints Jesus' feet with expensive perfume and wipes them with her hair. We aren't told why she does this. Devotion, gratitude, foreboding that something horrible is about to happen? The text doesn't say. What we do know is that Mary shouldn't have been there. She most certainly shouldn't have let her hair down, much less touched Jesus. And of course, as you know, Jesus defends her against Judas's phony disapproval. "Leave her alone," he says. "I won't be here much longer." And then the scene abruptly shifts. Crowds hear that Jesus is returning to the area, and they come to see not only Jesus but Lazarus, the evidence, you will, of his sedition. The following morning, the crowds greet Jesus by lining the road with palm branches. In the midst of all of this brouhaha, the text tells us that Jesus reflects. Now my soul is troubled. And once again, he goes into hiding. Now, I don't know about you, but I, for one, would love to have been there for a conversation with Jesus during this last moment of pause. He is waiting for exactly the right moment to show himself, to set in motion all that is to follow. Perhaps he is brooding, perhaps praying through the range of feelings that must have been going through his mind and heart. Finally, we get to chapter 13 and the room where Jesus and the disciples have gathered to share one last meal. There he is, hovering on the boundary between life and death, fully aware of what is to come, his heart full of what? Love, dread, resolve. Then he does the oddest thing, a thing that none of the disciples could have anticipated. He gets up right in the middle of the meal, takes off his robe, ties a towel around himself, pours water into a basin, and begins to wash the dirty, dusty, crusty, misshapen, grubby, undignified feet of his companions and friends. The obvious meaning in what he says is that we are to do likewise, not literally washing feet, perhaps, but to do likewise in the sense of serving others wherever there is a need. But here is the place where Blake's poetic vision invites us into a deeper meaning. Service, we understand, but what is more difficult, more challenging, more costly is this. When Jesus kneels and takes Peter's feet into his hands, he is moving across a boundary that we don't comfortably cross. Jesus, by touching the feet of his disciples, is getting up close and personal. He is drawing near to something that Peter doesn't want exposed. And Peter does exactly the same thing that most of us do when we are confronted with the possibility, even the threat, I would use that word, threat of intimacy. He draws back. You will never wash my feet. I wonder if he felt that same flutter, that panic, that impulse to tighten up that we all feel when someone gets too close. There's an ambivalence in us of wanting and yet fearing intimacy. Something akin to terror that if we are seen for who we really are, if our vulnerability is exposed, we will be found out and ultimately rejected. For most of us, it's far too risky. But Jesus doesn't let Peter get away with it. Unless I wash you, you have no share with me, he tells Peter. I wonder if Jesus knew from the beginning of time that it would all come to this. Did he plan to wash the disciples' feet? Or did he just maybe get the idea a few days before from Mary, who bent over him to wipe his feet with her hair? When she did this thing, and this is the interesting thing to note, when Mary did this thing to Jesus, this awkward thing to all who were present, Jesus did not draw away. There is no indication that he was embarrassed or uneasy. A woman touched him in a cherishing, personal way, and he was not afraid. He was not afraid. He endured the beams of love. Peter eventually learned to endure the beams of love too. He learned, as all of us must, if we are to have a share with the one we call Lord, to receive that love that was right there all along. Despite all of his flaws and failures, despite his shame and grief and fear and regret, and when he opened himself to God in that radical way, he became the rock upon which the church, and I don't mean Calvary, I don't mean the Episcopal Church, I mean the body of Christ of which we are all a part. Peter became that rock. I don't know for sure, but I think that William Blake must surely also have learned to endure the beams of love. For his poetry speaks to this exquisitely personal, tender vulnerability. Listen. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead? Gave thee clothing woolly bright? Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice? Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child, and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. On this night, we approach that boundary between heaven and earth. We hover right on the brink. Do we pull back, play it safe? Or do we open ourselves to the power and blessing of love? If your heart pulls you to endure the beams of love, then we invite you to come. You are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee.